I ditched my kids for freedom. That's the sentence I never say out loud, because it makes me sound like a villain, because people look at you different when they realize you weren't dragged away by some disaster. You walked. But that's the truth, and if I'm going to tell this right, I can't soften it. I'm the woman who had 2 healthy little kids, a husband who wasn't perfect but tried, a small house with a yard and chalk dust on the sidewalk, and I still packed a suitcase and left. Back then I called it a break, a reset, a chance to breathe, all the words that make selfish look like self-care. I told myself I was drowning under laundry and schedules and the way our life never had edges, just a smear of duties from sunup to sundown. I told myself other mothers must be lying in their posts about loving every minute, because I didn't. I loved the kids, but I hated who I had become, a calendar, a reminder, a human dishwasher. Mark, my ex, would come home still smelling like the warehouse and say, "What's for dinner?" and I would want to throw a plate just to hear something break. It didn't help that my friend Tasha kept texting reels about solo travel and healing journeys. Girls in linen dresses on cliffs at golden hour, backpackers with tiny tattoos drinking coffee in countries where nobody knew them. "You need this," she'd say. "You're too young to be stuck." I started believing her. I started looking at my life like a waiting room I could just stand up and leave if I were brave enough. The day it started for real was a Tuesday. Nothing special. I'd been up all night with our son, Liam, because he had an ear infection, and our daughter, Ivy, was on a costume deadline for crazy hair day at preschool, which somehow meant I had to glue pipe cleaners to a headband at 2 a.m. I found myself sobbing on the kitchen floor at 5:40 because the coffee machine blinked DSKL at me like even it was asking me for more. Mark came out in his work boots and froze like he'd walked into a crime scene. He tried, I'll give him that. He took the kids to daycare himself. He sent me a text at lunch with a dumb meme and a heart. And when he came home early, he said softly, "I booked you a room at that hotel by the river. Just one night to sleep. I'll handle everything." I stood there with the gratitude right there in my throat, and then something terrible slipped in behind it, the thought that one night wasn't enough. The silence in that hotel felt like oxygen after weeks of smoke. I lay on the bed and stared at the ceiling and heard nothing but my own breathing, and I thought, I could live like this. The next morning, I texted Tasha that I was finally ready for our reset plan. She sent me links for cheap flights and a list of hostels and an itinerary that would take me from Mexico City to Lisbon to Bali for under $3,000 if you're smart. I didn't show that to Mark. Instead, I asked him for another weekend, then another, and when he said, "Babe, we have to plan, I can't just call out of work," I snapped that he didn't understand what burnout does to a person. He backed off, guilty. I used that guilt. I started pitching the trip as a short break to save our marriage. 3 months, I said. If I don't go now, I'm going to explode and that won't help anyone. He stared at the floor for a long time and finally nodded. 3 months, he said. But we do this right. You call every day. You come home if the kids need you. I kissed him like a person who deserved that trust. The morning I left, Ivy wrapped her arms around my leg and asked if I could bring her a seashell from the far away. Liam, who was 2, pressed a Cheerio into my palm because he thinks snacks fix everything. I buckled them into the car for daycare, then unbuckled them for more kisses, then buckled them again because you can't hold on to a moment by stretching it. I told Mark to send me photos. He held it together until I went through security. Then he texted, "We'll be here. Come back to us." I cried on the plane. I cried in the hostel. I cried when I woke up without tiny feet in my ribs. But between the crying, there was this other feeling, a horrible relief, like I'd finally put down a heavy backpack. Days filled up with markets and bus rides and little bowls of food I didn't have to share. I sat in plazas and wrote in a journal. I took photos of doors. I told myself I was collecting stories for the kids, that I would show them how big the world could be. I called every day at first. I FaceTimed at bedtime and listened to Ivy explain how her teacher says she's a good helper, and I watched Liam try to show me a plastic truck by pressing it too close to the camera. After a week, I started missing calls. The time zones made it hard, I said, and it was true, but it was also true that I liked having dinner without worrying who was eating peas and who was hiding them in a napkin. Tasha arrived in Lisbon for a leg of the trip and things went off a cliff. There were bars and rooftops and new friends whose names I forgot. I posted selfies that looked like fake joy and got real likes. Mark sent a photo of Ivy with a gap where her tiny tooth used to be and my stomach flipped, not with love, but with the fear of being pulled back into that life through the phone. I hearted it and sent a wow. And then didn't call that night. I meant to stay 3 months. At 6 weeks I wrote an email to my manager that I needed to extend my leave because of mental health reasons. At 8 weeks, Mark asked me to come home because Liam kept running to the door every time a car pulled up. I said flights were expensive. He offered to pay. I didn't book one. By month 3, we were fighting on calls, the delay making our words land with extra thud. He said, "They need you." I said, "I need me." He said, "Are you with someone?" I said, "That's not what this is about." I wasn't, but I liked that he thought I could be. He said, "Please," and I said, "Stop making me the villain." That was the first time I used that word out loud. It stuck to the roof of my mouth like peanut butter. I told myself I'd be home by month 4. Then Tasha got an apartment share in Bali for cheap and sent me photos of a pool with flowers floating in it, and I told myself I'd go for just a few weeks and then come home recharged. I didn't tell Mark until I landed. He called twice. I declined both calls because the driver was holding a sign with my name and I wanted to feel like a person who had people to pick her up. After that, things changed fast. The calls from home were no longer little videos of messy faces, they were structured updates. "Ivy has a recital next Friday," Mark said. "Liam's ear infection is back." He sounded tired, like a person underwater. I felt the old guilt rise and used the trick I had learned to push it down. I told myself you can't pour from an empty cup. Meanwhile, my cup was full of sun and smoothies and strangers who said I was brave. Month 5 is when Mark stopped asking and started telling. "I filed for temporary custody," he said. "You've been gone too long. I need medical consent for Liam's surgery, and I can't keep standing here waiting." The word surgery knocked my breath sideways. It was tubes for his ears, routine, the doctor had mentioned it last winter, but hearing it without me there made me feel like someone had opened a door in my chest and let the wind in. "I'm coming home," I said immediately, and I meant it. I booked a flight for the next week because I told myself I needed a few days to wrap things up, like my life was a vacation rental I had to tidy. I missed that flight. Then I missed the rescheduled one because I got food poisoning or nerves or both. Mark stopped answering my long paragraphs. He sent one message that said, "The court date is next Thursday. You can call in if you can't be here." I called in. That was the day the judge said abandonment like it was a normal word. It sat there, heavy and plain. She asked how long I planned to be gone. I lied and said my return was already booked. She asked how often I had seen the children during my absence. I said we FaceTimed, then had to admit I had skipped a lot because of time zones. Mark had a folder. He had doctor's letters, daycare logs, even screenshots of my posts when I said finding myself on the road, with a cocktail emoji under a sunset. My own captions were evidence against me. The judge was calm. "Mr. Russo has been the primary caregiver since March," she said. "For stability, I'm granting him temporary full custody with visitation to be determined upon your return and participation in a reunification plan." I hung up and stared at the ceiling fan while it turned the hot air and realized I had finally run out of captions. I flew home the next week. I thought landing would fix it, like presence could erase absence. The house looked smaller. The chalk was washed away from the sidewalk. Ivy opened the door, then stopped like she'd seen a neighbor she kind of knew. Liam hid behind Mark's leg and peeked at me like I was the Easter Bunny. Fun from a distance, scary up close. I knelt and tried to hug them both at once. Ivy's arms were stiff, like she forgot the steps. Liam made a noise I didn't know yet, a shy little hum, and the ache inside me cracked into panic. I turned to Mark, expecting something. Maybe not forgiveness, but a signal. He was steady. He said hello and offered to make tea. He showed me the chore chart on the fridge, the schedule taped to the wall, the bin system that meant you always know where the shoes are. My systems had been vibes and improvisation. His were labels and times. The kids were calm. That should have made me feel grateful and safe. It made me feel replaced. My parents invited me over that night, and I thought at least I'd get a hug and a casserole. My mom opened the door and folded her arms so tight her shoulders climbed to her ears. She didn't let me in right away. She said, "We've been helping with pickup and drop-off for months." My dad looked at a spot on the floor the whole time. When I cried, my mother's mouth softened, but she didn't touch me. "We love you," she said finally. "But we love those kids more. You need to show, not tell." She handed me a printout. A list of therapists who work with mothers reuniting after long absences. It felt like homework for a class I had skipped the first half of. The next months were a blur of hoops. The court wanted proof that I was stable. I had to show up for parenting classes, meet with a counselor, and do supervised visits at a family center that smelled like Lysol and crayons. A woman named Arlene watched me play with my own kids and wrote notes when I forgot to cut grapes small or when I talked to Mark on the phone while Ivy was showing me her drawing. I hated her for catching me being human. I hated myself more because she was right to catch it. The worst moment was when Ivy fell during one visit and scraped her knee. She cried for Mark, not me. They called him to calm her down over speakerphone. He said, "It's okay, baby," and her whole body settled. I sat there holding a cartoon bandage thinking, this is what happens when you step out of your own life. Someone else learns the lines better than you. It would be easy to say I did everything perfect after that I stopped being selfish and fought my way back into their lives with a pure heart. The truth is uglier. I was angry a lot. At Mark for doing a good job, at my parents for taking his side, at the court for making me prove I was safe, at Tasha for freeing me, at Instagram for lying to me about what freedom feels like, and mostly at myself because I still missed sleeping in without a small alarm clock climbing on my face at dawn. But I showed up. I learned to show up. I stopped posting and started packing snacks. I got a job at a small office instead of chasing the creative path I had talked about for years and never took. I paid child support on time even when it gutted my checking account. I stopped asking Mark for coffee to talk and only asked about the kids. And slowly, Ivy reached for my hand on her own. Slowly, Liam leaned his sticky head on my shoulder without looking over it to see if Daddy was coming. But the old life? It's gone. Mark is not mine to win back. He started seeing someone, a kindergarten teacher who wears practical shoes and shows up 5 minutes early. The first time I saw her at a pickup, I thought I would die right there in the parking lot. She crouched to tie Liam's shoe and he laughed at something she whispered. I didn't hate her. That was the worst part. I couldn't even paint her as the villain because she hadn't done anything wrong. I was the one who left. Now I have every other weekend and a Wednesday dinner if I don't miss any steps. My parents will see me, but only if I meet them at the park and only if I don't try to talk them into taking my side. There are no sides, my mother says when I start. There are just children. She's right, and it burns. People love to tell me I was brave to be honest about this, but that's not bravery. Bravery would have been staying when the days felt the same and choosing to find joy anyway. Bravery would have been telling Mark I felt trapped before the walls started closing and asking for help without setting the house on fire. What I did wasn't brave. It was easy in the beginning and brutal later, like sliding down gravel. Freedom sounded like ocean waves and looked like glossy photos, but it tasted like loneliness and court paperwork. Mark walks around with his head high because he did what he said he would do. He kept those kids safe. He didn't trash me online. He didn't teach Ivy my worst names. He set boundaries so clean they cut, and he lives inside them now. He won, if winning means being the adult who never left. I'm learning that winning after a loss like this is smaller and slower. It's remembering the exact way Liam likes his apple slices and bringing the right stuffed animal to bedtime. It's turning my phone off during crazy hair day crafts and forgetting to take a photo because I'm too busy laughing at glue in my hair. It's telling the truth when Ivy asks, "Why did you go so long?" and saying, "I was selfish and I'm sorry," without adding excuses. I don't expect a parade. I don't expect my parents to clap for me. When my mother finally hugged me last month after I showed her the signed paper that says unsupervised visitation approved, she cried into my shoulder for 1 second and then pulled back and said, "Keep going." I will. I know now that the life I ran from wasn't a waiting room, it was the room. The noise and the mess and the small hands and the tired nights. That was the point. I thought freedom meant leaving everything. Real freedom, the kind that lasts longer than a flight in a caption, is looking at your ordinary life and choosing it on purpose. I didn't do that when it mattered, and I'll always carry the cost. He has custody, my parents set their lines, and that's fair. He gets the big win. I get the work. And on Wednesdays, when Ivy slides her drawing across the booth at the pizza place and Liam sneaks a pepperoni off my slice and we all laugh at the same time, I get a small win too. The only kind I deserve, and exactly enough.